that...
This meeting is being recorded.
Thank you. So yeah, just to make sure that your name matches the name that you're registered under. If you're not identifiable by name, then you may be moved into the waiting room so that your name can actually be adjusted. And please use the chat facility at any point throughout today's program, either to make a comment about what you're listening to or to ask a question. The chat moderator, that's me, may ask you to mute your audio so that you can speak directly to a presenter. But other than that, just to say that Corinna Sharples and Rod Westmus are both in the background helping me with the technical side of things. And I should say thank you to them both, because it's never easy managing these things on your own. Obviously, today's event is Life Stories, and we wanted to start the year off with something that was positive and uplifting, and hearing the stories of three distinguished speakers who have achieved a lot in their lives and in their careers, and have kind of faced adversity in different ways, but have then I always think of Auntie Joyce when I say that, because Auntie Joyce, who's a regular member of Guyana Speaks, always refers to adversity as opportunity. So that's kind of where we got the idea for today's event. So all about making positive change. And just before we move on into the programs, to talk very quickly about forthcoming events. On Saturday, the 18th of February from 3 till 7, we will be having an in-person event at Draper Hall in Elephant and Castle. The event is going to be called The State of the Nation, marking 53 years as a republic. And His Excellency Rajendra Singh, who's the High Commissioner of Guyana for the UK, will be our key speaker. But we'll also be having entertainment from Keith Waite and other members of the community. And it's also an opportunity for us to network, to meet, to lime. So there will be food that will be provided by the original Culture Kitchen. And when we put the invitation out, the actual, you can make your booking via Eventbrite. I think it's £5 for tickets, just so that we can help cover the cost of hiring the hall. But you'll also be provided with a list of sort of foods that will be available so that you can pre-order them in advance. And then we've also got an event on Sunday, the 26th of March. That one is via Zoom, and it's going to be, the speaker is the historian Cecil Gutsmore. He'll be talking about Walter Rodney, Guyana history and politics. And that's already available on Eventbrite if you want to book it. So just for those of you who are new to Guyana Speaks, just to say, if you're interested in following us, you can join us via Facebook, or you can follow us via Twitter at JC Westmus, or you can email us at guyanaspeaks@gmail.com. We're always interested in hearing what people from the community would like us to put on. And, you know, these events are essentially for the community. So if the particular speakers that you want to hear from, please do let us know. So I'm just going to stop that share and come back here. So yeah, so we're back, and we're going to be talking to our first speaker, who is Adele Williams Sewell MBE. So if Corinna, if you could spotlight Adele, that would be fantastic, so that we can see her. And I am probably, actually, I won't put my screen on just yet, but hold on 2 seconds. Okay. So Adele, welcome. Adele was awarded Member of the Order of the British Empire, MBE, in the New Year's Honours List 2023 for her charitable services to people with ovarian cancer. And before we start our conversation, I should share with the audience, Adele, that your husband who is founder and chair of the educational charity Generating Genius, was created Baron Sewell of Sanderstead on the 16th of December 2022. I believe it was kind of leaked into the newspapers in October, earlier on in the year. But I believe that also now means that you're officially known as Lady Sewell of Sanderstead. Is that how I would say it?
This is true. This is true. Yes.
Okay.
You could also call me Baroness Sewell of Sanderstead.
And okay, Baroness Sewell. And it slightly amused me. I mean, huge congratulations to you and your husband. But I love that your friends, obviously we've known each other for a while, and a lot of your friends have always called you Duchess. So I just thought it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy that this would happen. Because you're already thought of in those terms. But what did it feel like actually to receive the news of your new title, and have you actually gotten used to it yet?
Well, I think it's great that Tony has been made Baron Sewell or Lord Sewell of Sanderstead. But for my own part, I find it highly entertaining. And he had his official introduction to the House of Lords on Thursday, and we were all there. And while we were there, all the staff of the House of Lords kept referring to me as my lady. Thank you, my lady. Certainly, my lady. And that was, that was even more funny, really.
Well,
so,
I'll probably just keep referring to you as Duchess.
Well, Duchess, I think, is being a lady is a bit of a come down if you're being a Duchess. So.
Exactly. So let's stick with Duchess and assume they missed out on your real title.
My mother actually often called me Lady Adele while she was alive. I have no idea why. I never asked her why.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny and interesting at the same time.
Yeah. Well, Adele, let's go back to the beginning. So I come from a family where gender kind of played a really traditional role. And I think as a child, the expectation was I'd work as a secretary until I got married and had children. And so I was really surprised to discover that your undergraduate degree had been in physics, and that you were also responsible for managing a team of men both in India and the UK. I was just wondering, what was your upbringing like in Guyana? What were your parents' expectations of you?
Well, I like to say to people that I was practically born a feminist. I had 3 older sisters and 2 younger brothers. Our mother expected us to do everything in the home that she did, and our father expected us to do everything in the garden that he did. If there was a pile, for some reason when we were young, there was always a pile of sand or something being delivered at the front of the house. And if that needed to be shoveled up into a wheelbarrow and taken to the back, you better believe myself and my sisters would be doing that. I remember, we had, my dad made little garden beds for each of us in the backyard so we could plant little flowers. Zinnias, I think, were the first things that I remember planting with him. If the house needed painting, whether inside or outside, we would all be there getting involved. So I don't remember any chores in the house being particularly gendered, except maybe, I think my brother was the only person who had to empty the bin. But everything else, I think everything else that happened in the house was, it was an equal opportunities home. And certainly in terms of career, it was always that the world is your oyster. Go out and do whatever you want to do. I never felt restrained in any way or being pushed. Also some people, for example, their parents may have a particular business and they know from birth that when they grow up, they've got to work in that family business. We didn't have any we didn't have any restrictions. My dad would give us guidance if we asked about something, or if we looked as though we didn't know which direction we wanted to go in, he would make suggestions. I remember my mother always said to me, Adele, you should be a dentist. And on reflection, I think she was onto something there. I think she was probably thinking of the fact that you could run your own business, and you know, if you did want to have a family, you would be able to organize your time better and stuff like that. But you know, again, there was never any pressure. At least I don't remember experiencing any pressure in terms of what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go. Now, there were 6 of us children, and obviously everybody, depending on your position in the family, the position of the moon when you were born, you might experience the same parents differently. But you know, I'm speaking from my own perspective of how I grew up and how I enjoyed life. And I would say growing up in Guyana was the absolute best. We had so much freedom. We grew up in Section M, Camberwell. And as I understand it from my parents, pretty much they practically moved to a place, bought a plot of land. Other young people did the same thing. So a community almost was built up while we were growing up. And as children, we would be in and out of each other's homes and houses. If food was being served, another setting would be laid for you if you were there when food was being served. And probably the only rules that we had were that everybody in the neighborhood knew that you had to get home by the time the street lights came on, which was normally around 6 p.m.
Well, it's so interesting. So what I know you came to the UK when you were around aged 15. Do you have any memories of that journey and your sort of first impressions of Britain?
Well, we'd actually come to the UK previously when I was age 9 for 1 year, when my father was doing a master's at the University of Lancaster. The whole family came. And I remember that none of us kids were very keen on it. And we were pretty much counting the days until we came back. So when we came in 1978, the background to that is that my elder sister Jacqueline had died in 1976 in the Cubana airline crash. And I think that was probably one of the main motivating reasons why we left Guyana. Because again, we were very comfortable in Guyana, very happy in Guyana. Guyana was going through some difficulties politically, financially, etc., etc. But when we came to the UK, I remember my uncle Sydney came to pick us up at the airport, and he drove us home. And it was great. It was October. It was Saturday, the 14th of October, 1978, that I came to the UK. I left Guyana on Friday, the 13th of October. And I remember thinking, that's not a good date to be going on a plane. But, you know, we were all fine and everything went well. But I remember the grey skies. I remember seeing a young couple kissing on the road, and that was sort of like, I don't think I'd ever seen that growing up in Guyana. I don't think anybody kissed on the street. I don't think they do even now. And I remember that surprised me. And going to school was very different from the school I went to in Guyana. I went to the Bishop's High School in Guyana, and I went to Coloma Convent Girls' School. It was Coloma Convent Grammar School when I went there. It's now called Coloma Convent Girls' School. So it was very, very different experience. It took me years to get used to the UK. And I have to say that I've never quite gotten used to the UK weather. I love London in the summer. I think it's a great place to be. But right now, you see me here, I've got 3 layers on. So it's, you know, it has its challenges. Obviously, the UK has its benefits, but it also has its challenges.
Thanks, Adele. Yeah, I'm joining you. I was like, I'm going to show off my nice top, and then I was like, no, I'm not. I'm too cold. I'll wear a scarf around me. So I'm interested. I'm just going to return back to this whole issue of being a woman, being a Black woman, and then actually having people who worked for you. And I just want to see if I can bring up on the screen. Let me just see if I can. How do I do this? Here we go. Hang on a second. I wanted to bring up on the screen your you've got a little PowerPoint that will show people. Let's see. Here we go. Yeah, so there you are, Lady Sewell. And this is your team. So just talking from the position of being female and Black, what was your experience of studying physics at university and becoming a manager of a team of men, both in the UK and, as we'll see from the next slide, also in India?
So when I was at university, I think if there were 40 people in my first year physics group, 5 of us were women. I was the only Black woman. There was an Indian girl called Daxaben Patel, and there was an Iranian girl, and there were, actually maybe there were only 4 of us, four girls in the group, yes. So there was one white English girl, Kate, who I'm still in touch with on Facebook, Daxaben Patel, myself as the only Black woman, and another girl who was from Iran. And I think in the whole physics department, I only remember meeting one other Black person who was a PhD student from Nigeria. So and I would say that has pretty much been my experience of work for the whole time I've lived in the UK, and also my experience of life in the UK, unless I've actively gone out to look for associations where I can meet Black people. I've generally just been the one of very few people of color in the room. I would say in my earlier years, for example, at university, I actively seeked out more Black people. So I was really keen to be a part of the Afro-Caribbean Society, for example, at university. And I ended up being the first woman to run the African Caribbean Society by the time I was in my final year. But at work, I don't think I really experienced any major issues. I always say to people, and in fact, I interviewed a young woman recently, and she said almost the same thing. She said, I think I said to her, what's it like for you working in tech as a Black person? She said, you know, Adele, I'm 5'11". I think it's great. I stand out all the time. And I think I feel very similar. And everybody knows who's the Black woman who's in charge of the team. They can spot me easily, and I think very often you can use it to your advantage. As that young woman said, you stand out all the time. Everybody knows who you are. And I was delighted that she was tall, like I am as well. I'm not quite 5'11". I'm just a mere 5'10".
So you didn't even have any sort of difficulties in terms of interviewing, getting a job. I mean, you never experienced that kind of, once they see your face, you know, getting a sense that your racial background made a difference?
I think I don't remember anything like that in my early years. I think I have been to places, for example, oh yes, I remember when I was at a particular job, I was emailing with somebody, and this was a very senior person, and he came from Germany to have, one of the things he was going to be doing was have a meeting with me. And before he met me, my desk was outside the complete head of department's office, and I think he wanted something photocopied, and he asked me to photocopy it. And what I did was I took him to the photocopier, and I said, well, if you need to photocopy, this is where the photocopy is. And I think because of where my desk was located, he may have thought that I was the PA or something like that. I don't know.
So really it's about almost setting ground rules to your relationships that you have with other people that kind of, I guess,
yes,
is what's shaped your life. But so I'm interested then, so how soon into your career did you discover that you had breast cancer?
It was 1999 January, so I was 35. I was going to turn 36 that year. So I'd probably been working, I don't know, maybe 10 or 11 years. So when I first left university, I decided I didn't want to I had a degree in physics. I didn't want to follow a research career, because during my industrial year, I had spent the whole summer in a lab with blackout curtains and walls and everything. And it was a brilliant hot summer. And I thought, I don't want to spend my life locked up again. So once I graduated, I decided I wanted to go into management. And my first job was as a manager with Tesco. They had a graduate management training course. And then after that, I did a short course in technology. So I became a computer programmer and moved through the ranks from computer programmer to business analyst to project manager. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the question.
No, you've answered it really, because I was asking how soon into your career you had actually discovered that you had cancer.
Oh, right. Yes,
yeah.
yes. So I've been working in tech for a good 10, 11 years when I first had a diagnosis of cancer, which was breast cancer. And my daughter was about 4 years old. And I have to say that my first concern, was who's going to look after my daughter. Obviously, I've got a husband, I've got in-laws, I've got siblings. There would have been no shortage of people to look after my daughter. But as a mother, you think that you are the only person who can do that. And that was my first concern.
Could you just share with the audience, I know that you had several reoccurrences of the cancer, and not just breast cancer, but ovarian cancer. Can you just share what are the symptoms of ovarian cancer, kind of how common it is? And also, are some people more kind of vulnerable than others?
Yes. My understanding is ovarian cancer is the 6th most common cancer in women. And in the UK, about 7,000 or 8,000 women are diagnosed every year with ovarian cancer. And about 5,000 women die every year of ovarian cancer. It's important to be clear, it's not 5,000 of the 8,000 who've been diagnosed that year who died. They would have been people who were diagnosed previously. I hope that makes sense. 80% of the people who are diagnosed with ovarian cancer are over the age of 50, but that means that 20% of them are much younger. Unfortunately, because 80% are over the age of 50, ovarian cancer is known as an older woman's disease. And it does mean that a lot of women are told by their doctors when they have symptoms and they ask about ovarian cancer, they're often fobbed off and sent home and told, no, you're too young to get ovarian cancer, which is, of course, is not true, because if 20% are being diagnosed, every year who are under 50, that means about 1,500 women under the age of 50 will be diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And I was 44 when I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer for the first time. I think in terms of statistics, it's something like 2% of women throughout the world will be diagnosed with ovarian cancer. So anytime you're in a room of 100 women, 2 women could get ovarian cancer or may already have it.
How did you, yourself, how did you hold on to hope? Given you kept having recurring bouts of cancer and treatment, there must have been some really low moments for you. How did you hold on to the hope?
Well, one of my sisters says that I practice what she calls magical thinking. And but she does acknowledge that it seems to be working for me. So that's a good thing. When I was first diagnosed, I was given awful statistics. I was told my life expectancy was about 5 years. As I mentioned, I was 44. My daughter was 12 years old. Simple arithmetic said to me that I wouldn't be around to see her finish high school. And that was extremely upsetting and debilitating. And if I'm honest, the other thing was that when my breast cancer experience was so different from my ovarian cancer experience, it took 6 months from the time that I found a lump in my breast to completing all my treatment for breast cancer. I think I found a lump in my breast in October. I dragged my feet. I didn't go to the doctor until December. In January, I think I was told I had breast cancer. I had surgery in February. I had 6 weeks of radiotherapy and 6 weeks of daily radiotherapy. And I think by April or something, I'd actually finished all the treatment for breast cancer and was back at work long before the end of the treatment. I was back at work during the radiotherapy and carrying on with life. With the ovarian cancer, it actually took 18 months before I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and then another 6 months of treatment, which included surgery and chemotherapy. And during the 18 months of treatment, I think I was becoming weaker and weaker physiologically. I was still, sorry, what did I say? Did I say the 18 months of treatment?
Yeah.
This is a side effect I have of chemotherapy. My mouth doesn't always say the words that my brain means to say. And I don't even always hear it. I'm glad I heard it in the echo just then. So I had 18 months of symptoms before I was diagnosed. And during those 18 months of symptoms, I think my body physiologically was getting weaker. So that by the time I had the chemotherapy and the surgery, I was actually in hospital for 3 weeks. And I think I was very weak when I was in hospital. My daughter says, Mum, you almost had to learn how to walk again, because you would, after the surgery, you get out of bed and it just takes forever. Whereas I've had subsequent surgeries. In fact, I've had another 3 surgeries since then. And each time I've spent a shorter and shorter time in hospital, which is very gratifying. So in terms of holding on to hope, I think with the first diagnosis and the very negative prognosis, I spent a lot of time worrying about the cancer coming back again. Because unlike when I had the breast cancer, they pretty much said to go away and live your life. Whereas even though when I had the surgery for the ovarian cancer, they said they removed all the visible cancer, they also said that I had between a 70 to 90% chance of the cancer coming back. And when I was told that was devastating and demoralizing. And I think I just went away and I was worrying all the time, the cancer is going to come back, the cancer is going to come back. And sure enough, within less than 2 years, the cancer did come back. And I went to this wonderful place called Penny Bron in Bristol. And that's where the magical thinking started. Because I do think the Penny Bron place in Bristol is a magical place. And I saw a therapist, and I saw several different therapists there. One was a nutritionist, and she said the things that you should eat during chemotherapy to keep your strength up. I saw a psychotherapist, and she said to me, Adele, do you want to live or do you want to die? Because I kept going on to her about my poor prognosis. So she said to me, Adele, do you want to live or do you want to die? And I interpreted that to mean, she obviously didn't say that to me, but I interpreted that to mean, stop thinking about dying, Adele. Think about living. And I think I started then to think about living. I saw a healer at Penny Bron, and I was very skeptical about that. And she sort of put her hands over me, and she said, I have never felt so much warmth coming off of a person. And I think with my eyes closed, I started seeing all kinds of different colors. And she said, those are positive signs. And when I was lying down there, I recognized that my room number at Penny Bron was room B9. And I thought, oh my God, B9. Nonsense, right, Juanita? Nonsense. And I went back to the group of people, because they do everything in groups at Penny Bron, apart from those individual treatments. And I said, I've been in the best room all this time. I'm in room B9, I'm cured. And when I saw the surgeon after the recurrence was removed, he was now telling me that, okay, you've had a recurrence now. That means your time is even less than before. If it was 3 years, he was saying, the cancer is now going to just keep coming back quicker and more quicker. And then ultimately the chemotherapy isn't going to work. And, that's going to be the end of that. But I said to him, well, look, has there ever been anybody where it came back within 2 years, but it didn't come back again? And he said, yes, it's possible, but not probable. It's not likely. Because they like to tell you these positive things. And I just went away and I started focusing on the fact that, yes, there are people where it has come back once, but it doesn't come back again. And I think it was a good 6 or 8 years or something before I had another recurrence. That other recurrence was not great. I had a surgery which didn't work. But then I was lucky enough to get a further surgery, and that was 4 years ago. So I'm now 15 years post being diagnosed with stage 3C ovarian cancer with a life expectancy of less than 5 years. And in May this year, I'm going to be celebrating my 30th birthday.
29th, Adele. I'm sure it's your 29th.
So
Yeah.
yes, so I'm going to be 60 in May, and I sit here very hopeful that I'm going to see my 70th birthday as well. I no longer worry about death or what cancer can do to me or anything like that. You know, it's really about waking up every day and putting your best foot forward. So in terms of holding on to hope, it's really been a combination of things. And I would say that Penny Brown was one of the things which made a big difference to my life. My friends and family have made a big difference in my life. I realize we've gone way over time.
Well, we've got about another 5 minutes. It just means that we won't be able to do the Q&A, but people can share questions that we might be able to pick up at the end. But I just, in terms of I love the story about benign. That's just fun. That's the kind of thing that I would love. But you have also taken that hope and you've given it to so many other people. And I think that's the thing that's been amazing watching your journey, is the way that you've inspired so many others. And that kind of links into the fact that you then went on to set up the Southeast Cancer Help Centre in Purley. So yes. I just wondered, before we kind of round up, maybe if you could tell us about that and also about how you came to found the Touch of Teal.
Right. So the things I've done are the things that I recognize that I had a need for myself. I think when you've had treatment, all your family and friends correctly want you to get better. So there's actually no real space where you can talk about your fears. And I think that I set up the support group because I had a need in myself to really express the things that I was still worrying about. And every month we meet, and we've been meeting since about January 2011, and it's other women like myself who've had a diagnosis of ovarian cancer. And we meet and we just talk about how we're feeling. If anybody has had something new has happened, any changes have happened. We have lost people, unfortunately, during that time. But the overall belief in the group is that it's better to come along, to meet people, to form friendships. Even if you lose people along the way, you've improved their journey and they've improved your journey. And then in terms of Touch of Teal, when I had the breast cancer diagnosis, it was easy to find places where you could raise funds or celebrate the fact that you've survived breast cancer, but I couldn't find many opportunities like that for ovarian cancer. So
there's some interference on the line. Can you please make sure you're all on mute? Thanks. Sorry, Adele, go ahead.
Yes, so we started off having a small afternoon tea at the Mayfair Hotel in London, and it's grown and grown, and it's been going since 2010. And we've raised, I think, about £250,000 for Overcome. We've also brought loads of women together. Again, it's really the community which helps people to survive this. Yesterday, we had the photo shoot for our next Touch of Teal event, which is in April. And the ladies, they were buzzing, and I've got a little WhatsApp group for them so they can keep communicating between now and when they have the event. And they've been buzzing from morning. When I woke up, the messages were coming through. They were saying how wonderful it was to meet other women, because there can be a lot of isolation, specifically with ovarian cancer, because it's relatively rare compared to breast cancer.
I just had one final question for you, Adele, and just because I want to circle back to Guyana, really. So we started talking about your childhood in Guyana, and I think I know you said Guyana's the best place in the world, and I don't disagree. How have you managed to retain, a strong sense of your Guyanese-ness, given that you're saying, like, within your workplace, within the society, a lot of the people you're in contact with are primarily, obviously, people, local to Britain. So yeah, yes. If you could say something about that.
So in 2002, I went to my first International Bishops High School reunion in Guyana, and my school friends, who we're called the J Crew, which is the polite version of the Jackass Crew. It was actually in 2002 that I named our group the Jackass Crew, because we got together in 2002. Having left school, we would have been the class of 1981. So more than, was that 40 years or something? My arithmetic isn't as good as it used to be. And we got along as though we'd been in touch all together. And we've kept in touch since then. And I think probably before I went to that reunion, my accent was probably becoming a little more English. But having got together with the J Crew, I think you just fully become Guyanese again. And you immerse yourself in more Guyanese-ness through those connections.
Thank you, Adele. So final question, what's the most important that you've learnt, most important lesson that you've learnt from your experiences and that you'd like to share maybe with the next generation?
I think I've learned quite a lot of things. I'm not sure exactly how to put them into words, but something that you mentioned to me, Juanita, you said that when you came to the touch of Teal, race didn't make any difference. It didn't seem to be important. And you reminded me that when David Lammy had come to be our guest speaker at Touch of Teal, I think 10 years ago, his mother had died of ovarian cancer. He said something very similar. And my reply to you was, well, cancer don't care. Cancer doesn't discriminate. Cancer is after all of us. And I think when I've been in hospital, waking up in the morning in tears, the nurse who's holding my hand would have been, any one of a variety of colors. And she didn't care what color I was. And also I didn't care what color she was, because I was just glad for someone to hold my hand, really. So I think that's one message I would like to pass on to the next generation, that if we want to live in a world where race doesn't matter, but do we find ourselves, we're in rooms where there's only one race, we need to check ourselves and we need to question what we're doing and how we're contributing to make the world look the way we want it to be.
That's a really wonderful way to end, Adele. Thank you so much. And I'm going to put my hands together on behalf of the audience, as you won't be able to hear them. But thank you so much for sharing your story. That was really powerful. And I think you've been an amazing inspiration. But also, I mean, because I've followed your journey and I've always been, and what I've learned from you is hope. I was never somebody who really thought of hope. And I think what I've realized is that hope actually changes your life. It gives you a life. And but also, as you were saying, with the touch of Teal, that was my first experience of being in a space in the UK where I kept looking around. I kept thinking, this is so extraordinary. I had no sense of any racial dynamics going on in the room. And I absolutely loved it. And hence I've signed up to join you again for the next Touch of Teal event. But yeah, thank you so much, Adele. Corinna, if I can ask you just to remove the spotlight from Adele, and then we'll move quickly, I think, because I'm looking at the time, 4:17. If we could move now on to Russell Profitt. And Adele, if you'd like to stay on, please do, because we'd love to chat with you at the end. But yes, Russell, thank you so much for joining us. I just, I'm sure everybody will have seen your bio online and when they sign up for Eventbrite, but just to remind everyone that you were awarded your MBE in the 2009 Queen's Birthday Honours List for your services to the community in Southwark in London. Yeah, so if we could start maybe, well, first of all, thank you. And second, tell us a bit about your background and your childhood in Guyana. I need to double check, actually, Corinna, if you're able to give Russell the co-hosting so that he can share. I think you've got a PowerPoint for us, Russell, if you could enable him to share it.
I'm not sure I'm allowed. I've got permission to do that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So let me just see. Click on here. So what name are you under? Hang on, are you at the top? Just trying to find you. Oh, there you are. Okay. Co-host. There you go. You should be able to share it now.
Did we see that?
I'm not seeing it yet. Yes, technology is always here to challenge us. So, I can see if I've got it on mine.
Are we not there?
Not yet, no. Let me see if I've got a copy of your PowerPoint. Okay. Oops. I think I've got a copy of it. I'll share it from this end. I'm sure you probably made some amendments, but let's see, somewhere here. Sorry to keep everybody waiting. Decent. Okay. Decent. Should be this one, I think. How about that? I don't know if it's on a timer, hopefully not, but there you are. So let's start. Can you see the screen okay?
Not yet.
So you can't see the shared screen?
It's still showing your desktop, Juanita.
Is it?
Sure,
Oh, wow. Okay, that's strange. That is strange. Okay. Let me go down here. Not sure what's happening with this. Try again.
I can't see the presentation.
No, I can't see yours. Let me try one more time and see if I can show yours. Can you see it yet, Corinne?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I
there
can
now.
see it. Yes.
You can now? Okay.
Yeah.
It's coming up. we go.
Okay, good. All right. So
You wanted me to start at the beginning?
I want you to start at the beginning. Yeah. So tell us about your background and your childhood in Guyana.
It's a fascinating story. It'll be written up one day, but this version cuts out some of the, shall we say, more spicy bits.
Okay.
I think my daughters are listening. Yeah, I was born in Georgetown Hospital in '47 as a blue baby, which meant I had limited prospects of surviving. My mum thought I was going to be a girl, and she had all the clothing that I was supposed to wear when I was born embroidered with the letter R, because she wanted to name her girl Rosalind. But when I popped out as a boy, and there was limited prospects for me of surviving, she swiftly had to come up with a name for a boy. And one of her favorites at the time was the actress Rosalind Russell. So she plumped for the name Russell, and that's how I was christened. Russell, and at the time, I was Russell d'Anjou. My dad's name is d'Anjou. And so that's the surname I was given. He was not really much part of my life, but he was also related to the Hoyt family. And so one of my uncles was Desmond Hoyt.
Oh.
And from time to time, I would visit the Hoyt family because we were quite friendly, but I never lived with them. I lived in Georgetown in Charlotte Street, in one of those buildings that stood above the ground on pillars, which was because Georgetown would frequently be flooded. And if people can remember at the time, the floods would saturate the whole ground for days. And unless anything was upstairs and safe, it would just flow away. And everything that happened to be on the ground would also flow through the city. Eventually, water would recede, and as kids, we could go back to living again. Mum at the time looked after me. She was a qualified needlework seamstress, but she had to do many, many jobs because we weren't a very well-off family. She worked at the Palm Court restaurant, then in central Georgetown, and was quite an upper-class joint. And it was great because at least she was able to bring home some of the goodies which we were able to enjoy as part of our diet. So there were some good bits. One of the bits I didn't enjoy was she often used to take me to Southwark Market at the weekend for shopping. And it took ages to get there because she would stop and chat with friends along the way. And I thought that that was a little bit boring. So I would disappear sometimes at the back of the market, close to the Demerara River. And on one occasion, I nearly fell in because the water was so attractive as I was leaning over as a little 4 or 5 year old boy. But fortunately, I was grabbed by one of the shop workers and rescued. As a kid, I loved reading. I was able to read very early. And so that was my great pleasure. And it also was something that was enjoyed a lot by my grandmother, Bridget. Grandmother Bridget was a member of the Caldera family. And subsequently, I've discovered that there's much to be said about the Calderas in Guyana, but that's another story. I went to school at Comenius Moravian, which in the picture you can see on the top right-hand corner. It was a very formal school. You would enter on the ground floor as a young kid and work your way along. And then at the end of your primary school, you'd come out at the top, hopefully with a qualification. School was, I suppose, a bit difficult if you had a problem. I avoided having problems because I knew the head teacher seemed to have something in for my family, and it wasn't anything to do with me. So I tried to keep out of his way as best I could. But everything was conducted in quiet voices, and you got sharp looks if you did anything wrong. And the fun was in the playgrounds and after school. I quite enjoyed school, really. Mother, like a lot of young people at the time, in the 50s, left Georgetown, and at the age of 9, I had to go and live with my grandmother, Bridget, in Kitty Village. She looked after us as well as a number of other members of the family. Again, she wasn't a very wealthy woman, but she always pushed the value of education and encouraged us to take, I suppose, to make great use of the opportunities we had in life, even though they were limited. I had some great times with her. She used to take me out at certain evenings to Border Green in Georgetown to listen to the speeches of the politicians at the time who were trying to raise the demand for independence for Guyana. And we would take in and enjoy the oratory of LFS Burnham and Chetty Jagan. They were together at the time, and they were united in their demands for Guyanese independence. That didn't last for very long.
Russell, I just wanted to interject because I'm conscious of the time. So I wanted to butt in by asking if you could talk to us a little bit about this journey. You know, the journey. I know you travelled alone to the UK at the age of 12.
Sure.
Can you tell us about that journey? And
eventually, my mother was able to save enough money to send back to Georgetown so that I could be. She could purchase a ticket for me to travel to the United Kingdom, and I had to do that on my own. And I was then about 13 years. So unfortunately, when I arrived at London, there was no one there to greet me because of the mix-up in the times and the dates. And so I arrived at Gatwick Airport, where I had to wait. And eventually, someone came up to me and asked what I was doing and where I wanted to go. And all I had was a little letter from my mother with the address, which I shared with the gentleman. He bought a ticket and so put me on a train to London and said, when you get to London, ask a policeman how to get to where you want to go to.
I just say, Russell, I think when I asked you about this initially, you talked about the fact that you had gone from Guyana to Trinidad first, then from Trinidad to the States, then from the States. And I just thought that was such an extraordinary journey for a 13-year-old to have done on your own. Weren't you afraid?
Well, I sort of was afraid, but I think I've always had that little survival gene in me, and I always knew that I would make it. It was terrifying, really, getting onto the airplane for a start, something I'd never done in my life. I had no idea what to do, but clearly I was going to London, and that was the main thing in driving me going forward. The journey from New York to London lasted forever and a day, and certainly was not a very enjoyable one because I had no one to talk to. I landed, as I said, in London. And rather like the previous speaker, as soon as I came out of the airplane, though I was wearing a woolen suit that mother had sent for me, a sort of a cold shiver went through the whole of my body, which never ever disappeared. And that was in July 61.
Mm. Yeah, so you would have been around for the coldest winter as well, which I always remember my mother talking, I think it was the winter of 62, 63.
Yes.
So, but can you tell us, can you talk to us about, you obviously would have had to attend secondary school. So if you could just fill us in on how easy it was to fit into school and what life was like when you arrived.
Well, I arrived when I was 13, so I'd missed out 2 years of secondary school. And of course, I knew nothing about that. Mother knew nothing about that. So I was put into a form where they'd already formed a lot of the friendship patterns. And I felt a little bit left out of that. And most of the lessons were on topics that I really didn't know a great deal about. So I had to self-educate myself to catch up with where they were. The other thing that was really strange was I was a black boy, and people kept referring to me as this black boy. And of course, I knew nothing about what a black boy was because race had never featured as a factor in my life growing up in the Caribbean. And not only that, but others who saw me wanted to have a fight. Come on, boy, can I beat you? I can beat. And so I thought, this is just crazy. I'm at school trying to learn, trying to understand, and I'm being thrown into physical challenges. I had one very lucky fight, which was a right connection that knocked a kid out. And so not many people challenged me after that. The secondary school was a secondary modern, but fortunately, it was one where the school leadership held unusually high expectations of its pupils. So when I said I wanted to go on to university, it didn't seem odd. And of course, I had to pass exams to be able to do that. And eventually I succeeded and ended up going to college.
So you were at Goldsmiths College. What was it like? I mean, given the sort of within the context of significant social and political change.
Well, Goldsmiths College was quite a revelation for me. Again, I had to go on my own because mother was never in a family where we would get time or where she could get time off to take me to these sorts of places. Anyway, college was awkward because, again, I was one of the, I suppose there were 2 other black kids at college at the time, 2 other black people. And it didn't really turn out to be as easy as I first thought. I met a bunch of people who were friendly, and they all related to each other. And I eventually managed to make it possible to become involved in their lifestyles. But at the same time, I was worried about losing connection with family and friends with whom I'd grown up in North London. And the thing that brought out my involvement was more the politics of student life and the interest that everybody else had in student politics at the time. I'd come from this Caribbean background looking for independence and wanting to follow a route towards equality. and found that there were other members of the student community who were just as bothered about participating in a campaign for political freedom and going on demonstrations and trying to get to a position where you can feel that you're making a real contribution to life. And that's something that I was able to draw on and become a bit more grounded with, and started to develop a sense that it really was where I wanted to be. It's a place I met my future wife, who's been a great source of support and inspiration to me, and is a very wonderful lady, really, and has stood by me through all the thick and thin parts of life that we've had. Eventually, I became a president of the Students' Union, and that was where I was able to articulate a little bit more the views that I had about wanting to see, I suppose, Black people become more involved in British society. At that stage, there were no members of Parliament who were Black, and none of the political parties wanted to embrace the idea of Black political representation. I felt that that was wrong, and I suppose being inspired by the writings of Martin Luther King and the activities of the political movements in America and elsewhere, I sort of decided that I would make a challenge to try and change the establishment. I eventually became the first Black president of the Students' Union, and that was at a time when the whole movement for student involvement and participation in their education was quite rife. And I was involved as one of the leaders of that and helped, I suppose, raise the profile of that issue across the National Union of Students. And eventually, I became a member of the executive when Jack Straw was the president of the NUS. I graduated from Goldsmiths, as you can see there. Mum came along, which was nice. And I then went into education. My first post was at Rushy Green School, and there's a photograph there of me being one of the members of the team at the school at the time. There were no Black teachers. There were hardly anybody who was Black in the profession. So again, that was an issue that I decided needed to change, and decided that I would make a headway towards becoming a head teacher as a way of, I suppose, inspiring others to see that it's something that can be done. As part of that, I applied for deputy headships and eventually became deputy head at Grinling Gibbons School in Deptford in the 80s. I wasn't really too happy with that position at the school because, again, it was just like being on your own, taking on the establishment. I was trying to change the narrative about Black people in education. The stories, the imagery around school at the time was all about the traditions of British society and people who had achieved through their Britishness. And I collected together a number of stories about Black people, ranging from Martin Luther King, Stevie Wonder, and the likes, and put it together in a book, and took it to Longmans, the publishers, who agreed with me that it should be published as an assemblies book. And it was one of the first books at the time to carry multiracial stories into school. Of course, I was attacked in the Daily Telegraph, and I had to withstand that pressure. At the same time, I was a local councillor, and during those tumultuous times, we were dealing with the New Cross fire and the Black People's Day of Action. I was also quite prominent in pulling together a number of councillors who were Black to again raise the profile of Black representation in British politics. So the pressure was quite great, and eventually I was told by the inspector who looked after schools at the time that really you have to choose. You can't be a head teacher and be a politician. So the choices then were pretty clear. And fortunately, I saw an opportunity to move into local government by working for Brent Council as an advisor on race relations issues. And that's something I did for some time. During those times, we were being told that you couldn't have Black MPs, you weren't going to represent the community, but we wouldn't settle for that. A number of us took the fight into the Labour Party against the better wishes of the Neil Kinnocks of the time and the Roy Hattersley. And it was a pretty ferocious struggle at times to establish a platform for the representation of Black people in Parliament. Eventually, we managed to pull that off in the 80s. And we saw the election of Diane Abbott, we saw the election of Paul Bateng, Bernie Grant, and the like. I lost in East Lewisham in 87 and was accused really of losing the seat because of the profile I had taken. And it really was quite a tough time. So the choices I had at that stage was to continue the fight or to support the family. And I chose the family and moved on to work in local government in Southwark, eventually, where I moved from education into the regeneration department. And as a result of the work that I was doing in regeneration to renew the neighborhood of Peckham, I was eventually awarded the MBE by the Queen towards the end of the time that I was there. So in a nutshell, that's a bit of the story of my life.
Thank you. Let me just see, was there another? Oh, that was it. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that. I think that's really fascinating. I've got so many questions I want to ask you, but I think I'm going to, we'll go to talk to Dr. Thompson first, and then we'll have the questions at the end. But that was really fascinating, Russell, and thank you for the great timing. That was really good timekeeping me. So really appreciate that. And as you can't hear everybody else, I'm putting my hands together for you. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Okay, so Corinna, again, if you could unpin Russell. Oh, you've already sorted everything out ahead of time, so that's fantastic. So if we can now welcome Dr. Yvonne Thompson, CBE. And just for those of you, you will have seen Dr. Thompson's bio in the Eventbrite link, but just as a reminder, I hope you won't mind me calling you Yvonne.
Of course not.
Okay, good. So you got your CBE in the Queen's birthday honour list in 2003, quite a while ago now.
20 years ago. Yeah.
20 years ago, for your services to women, small business and ethnic minorities or minorities. But let's start with your background. I mean, where in Guyana were you born? And, you know, if you could talk to us a little bit about what your parents did, just a little bit.
Sure. So, well, first and foremost, thank you very much for inviting me. And hello, Russell Profitt. My God. Now I know the full story. Thanks for sharing. That was amazing. And also Adele, thank you very much. Well, I think, you know, our stories are probably a little bit quite similar, you know, and I think most of us, what I say is, you know, for me, immigrants are the true entrepreneurs, because when you leave your homeland, quite often don't know anybody else where you've arrived to, sometimes can't speak the language. If you can speak the language, it's a different accent or, you know, and it's just very difficult. But we start at the bottom and we rise to the top. I mean, you know, look at the two people before me. But going back to, you know, just a little bit about my history, I was born in Berbice. And I've got to admit, I've never been there apart from when I was a baby. So I don't really know it in person. Oh, I see Adele's come on now. I don't really know it in person, so to speak. And shame on me, I've only been back to Guyana once. Unfortunately, the second time I was about to go back with my mom and my daughter, we booked the tickets and everything, and my mom died about a month before we were supposed to go back. So I've not actually revisited, but I do plan to, I really do. So my parents, my grandparents, or my grandfather was from Calcutta. My mother was, sorry, not my mother, my grandmother was born in Guyana. And of course, they had my dad, mixed race. My mom was from Haiti and moved to Guyana. And we all just, you know, as we do in that kind of environment, we are just a very mixed up, you know, lots of different. I hate to agree with you, Adele, but I'm going to use a Jamaican saying. What is it? From many nations, from many nations come one. Out of one comes many nations, or whatever. So that's us as well. So my parents obviously ended up in Georgetown. I have 5 siblings. I was the 6th. And as many of us Caribbeans did, or people from the Commonwealth, my parents answered the call of the Queen to come and help rebuild the motherland. So my dad came over first, and I think it was about 5 or 6 years, maybe, before myself and my mum. I was the youngest of the 6. Myself and my mum traveled to the UK on the good old BOAC. Now, how many of you actually remember what that means?
British Overseas
Airways Corporation.
Airways Corporation, something like that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I still vividly remember the little golden aeroplanes and the beautiful bags that became very trendy, which now, if you still have one, you can sell for a huge amount of money because it's in fashion right now. But yes, I vividly remember my last memories. Let me go back a little bit. My last memories of Guyana, because I was 4 or 5. Can't remember exactly now. It's a long time ago. 4 or 5. My last memories in Guyana. We lived in a housing scheme in Georgetown. I remember going to school with my elder brothers and sisters, you know, literally running through. One of the things that they used to tease me with, we used to go to school via a burying ground. And of course, running through the burying ground, my foot was always the one that would get stuck in a hole. and they would run away telling me and teasing me that the Jumbie's going to come and catch me. Those are the things that stick in my memory. But yeah, I mean, that was, apart from the fact that it was such freedom, so such great memories as a child. And then, you know, one day literally running through Guyana, and the next day I'm on this plane, and then the next thing I remember was landing at, and I do remember landing at Heathrow and getting on a train to Battersea. We ended up in Battersea, Clapham Junction to be precise, is where we came to, and then we found somewhere to live in Battersea. My immediate memories were thinking, why, you know, I hated my parents for moving me out of the sunshine to somewhere that I'd never been so cold before. I'd never seen fog before. You know, I'd never seen I don't even recall seeing white people before, because that was really scary. But it was traumatic in many ways, but it was great in many ways, because they obviously saw the, you know, the bigger picture. And I do remember, you know, thinking that, you know, my parents moved from one side of the world to another side of the world. And, you know, they arrived with what I always call a backpack of dreams, because they obviously saw something. They had dreams for each of their children that they wanted to, you know, give them a better life. Of course, at 5 or 6, I didn't know that. In fact, I think it was a couple of days before my 6th birthday, as I remember, that I arrived. Going to school in Battersea was an absolute nightmare. But St. Mary's Catholic School, I remember it well, for the wrong reasons. But even before getting to school, obviously my parents had to find somewhere for us to live. And I seem to remember thinking, you know, we arrived and we're living probably in the worst part of London, in the worst street in the worst part of London. And I think we got the worst house in the worst street in the worst part of London. It was right, in fact, the address was 50 St. Joseph Street, Battersea, SW11. We didn't have the extra postcode then. And it was right under the power station. The power station was still live at the time. So, you know, amongst everything else, all of a sudden we were living under this shower of coal dust and everything else. But, you know, soon after that, I think it was later the same year, the rest of my family arrived, my elder brothers and sisters. So we were all together, but we ended up in 2 rooms. And I know you all know the story of the paraffin heaters. You all know the story, dare I say it, being very crude, the buckets that you had to, you know, do whatever you're going to do in, take it outside, empty it. Once a week, my parents would get us all in the garage at the back of this house, boil up buckets of hot water and take us out there. And that was our bath. We didn't even have the tin bath at the time. We would stand up in the back and she would scrub us down. And, you know, and that's just the way it was. No inside toilets. But, you know, I always say, though, that was some of the most memorably, I have a lot of memories around that time. Because again, you know, you were with the family, we were getting on, we were doing what we had to do. We stayed there probably for about, it must have been about 8 or 9 years. And during that time, we arrived in 60 or 61. And it was during that time that a lot of things changed in the world, like the moon landing, you know, JFK, dare I even say, I'm sure Russell's going to correct me. It may have been around the same time Martin Luther King got shot. So it's quite, you know, a milestone in history for Black people. So after being there for quite some time, my parents saved up money. My mum did about 2 or 3 part-time jobs. My dad downgraded his job when he arrived here because he was a policeman police sergeant in Georgetown. But when he arrived here, of course, he was never going to get in the police force. So he became a plumber's mate at St. Thomas's Hospital, which was probably one of the better things that he could have done, because that was a job for life. He stayed there until he retired, from the time he arrived to the time he retired. So he literally did have a job for life. And a bit like Russell's mum, you know, we got some goodies from the, from the canteens and things at the hospital, you know. And one of the things that is still my favorite to this day is, it's not angel cake. Oh, of course, now I can't remember the cake that has marzipan wrapped around it. Do you know the one I mean, with the pink and yellow squares?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, somebody knows what I mean.
Yes.
Great.
No, I know what you mean. I'm trying to remember the
Battenberg.
name of it.
Battenberg, that's
Yes,
it. Battenberg,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
So, and to this day, it's one of my favorite, you know, sweet cakes. So we landed in Southwest London and we stayed in Southwest London. We were in Battersea, then we moved to Wandsworth, 121A or Farthing Lane in Wandsworth. I remember that well. Then from Wandsworth, we moved to Thornton Heath. And that was the mainstay. That was the major part of, of my growing up and going to school in that area. But, as I said, my mum did about 3 part-time jobs. My dad was a plumber's mate at St. Thomas's. But, a lot of my work ethic and a lot of the, the kind of positivity and all those things, everything I am today, or the majority of things I am today, I get from my mum, because I used to wake up early with my mum to help make breakfast for everybody else. So now you can quite often find me working between 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning. My mum, I always say that, she did a great job raising 6 kids, or looking after 6 kids, and sometimes 7 kids if you included my dad. So, because dads need a lot of looking after. So what else can I tell you? Is it at this point you would like to ask me a question, or should I keep going? Am I doing well?
I'd like, you're doing very well. I was just thinking you're covering everything. I wasn't going to interrupt until, you came to a pause, because you've been covering everything that I was kind of thinking of asking.
Fantastic.
And yeah, I had wanted to sort of get a sense of what had led to the road to success. And of course, you're saying your mother was very hardworking, and that's sort of part of the narrative. But I think, obviously I see from the work that you've done, you've obviously been at the center of many successful firsts, and also your entrepreneurial work is also, well, I see it as a form of activism. And your business activities are sort of tended to align with the needs of the Black community, or with Black women, or with women in general. And I just wondered if you could talk about why those aspects of business were so important to you.
Well, I think it comes, it very much comes from my mother, and my 2 sisters. There's 3 girls and 3 boys. My 2 elder sisters, but my mom is still my inspiration today, and she just, I think my partner and I formed a nickname for her. We call her the domestic engineer. She's, everybody's an engineer now, so she was the domestic engineer because she made everything in the housework. Everything in the house worked. She made it work. She found ways to, make the, schedules work, to make the finance work, to make the food work, everything worked. So, you know, we call her the domestic engineer. But as you said, for me, being the youngest of the group, it was almost like, I find that the youngest in the family always seems to have to work that much harder to get recognized by the parents or to reach the heights that the others did. Now, my eldest sister was she was a nurse. She was, oh gosh, my brain is gone. A midwife. God, how was that so hard? So she was a midwife, and I always thought, oh yeah, I want to do that. I want to do that. It was the competitiveness in me. In fact, I said to my parents, I want to be a doctor. I don't want to be a midwife. I want to be a doctor. And even though I trained jumping a lot of the school days, you know, I think, you know, much the same as Russell, we all had that kind of fight to keep your dignity, to maintain your, you know, yourself, your being as a person of color, you know, from being spat at when you're dressed up in your Sunday best waiting for the bus to go to church, from being bullied at school, from all those things. And in so many ways, especially at school, I went to Westwood Girls, which was a secondary school. And I always remember feeling like, was it the poor cousin or the poor relative or whatever it is they, you know, because again, it was all these white girls, they were all wearing heels, they were wearing their lipstick, their cut, you know, and they were all going to be models and they were going to be this and they were going to marry rich. I've never heard of any of them since leaving school. One or two of the Black girls I do know. A couple of them have ended up in EastEnders. A couple of them are doing well in Croydon and locally. But really, funnily enough, none of the white girls that were going to go off and, you know, conquer the modelling scene all disappeared. But as I said, I wanted to be a doctor. I trained at Croydon Polytechnic. And when I finished training to be a state registered nurse, I don't know, it all changed. I decided that I didn't want to be in the medical profession anymore. But later on for me, I did go on to be, as you know, I am a doctor twice over, but nothing to do with medicine. So I've got, I've been honoured to be given 2 honorary doctorates, which, so I achieved my goal. I cheated, but no, I didn't. I don't say I cheated. I say that I went to the University of Life. That's how I earned my doctorates. So
I think it's just worth reiterating, just for the audience. I don't know if it's just in case some people didn't read your bio, because I just wanted to point out that you'd started the first Black-owned PR company.
That's right.
I think is it ASAP Communications?
ASAP Communications.
Yeah, right.
40 years ago.
40 years ago
this year.
Wow.
I also started the first Black Women in Business Network 25 years ago last year. And for those of you who know anything about radio, I was part of the group that started the first Black 24-hour radio station in the UK, which is Choice FM. And I was the only woman on that board. And, you know, I think we were, again, you know, we were pioneers during that time for so many different reasons. It was a great time to be alive, and there were so many fantastic things happening, you know, from the riots, from the marches, you know, it was just a time of change. And I'm so proud and so happy to be part of it. But what makes me even more heartfelt is that the generations that have come behind us, they have really taken the bull by the horns, especially now that we're talking everything digital, everything AI, you know, web-based. I mean, the stuff that's going on out there is phenomenal. And I'm proud to be the shoulders that a lot of those youngsters have stood on, you know, as Adele I'm sure would say the same, as would Tony would say the same. And I'm sure Russell would say the same thing as well.
I'm just kind of interested in, because of the period that you came to the UK in as well, what you know, what role did people like Martin Luther King or CLR James or Sojourner Truth, Walter Rodney, any of those figures, what role did they play in terms of your kind of activism, in a sense, you know, and because you're obviously a visionary, coming up with new ideas about what needs to be done or introduced. And if you could say something about that.
Well, for me, you know, during the real act, oh yes, I'll tell you something in a moment, talking about Martin Luther King, we're actually hosting Al Sharpton over here. I think it's next week actually, or the week after, very soon, because I'm still very much entrenched in all of that. And for me, it's always been, but I think because of the struggles that I went through, the struggles that I know my parents went through, I don't know that I was as much influenced by all of those activists as my parents were. It's only now, I say now, in my later life, but not now, you know, probably I would say in the last 20 years or so that I've really, you know, come to grips and been starting to champion everything. It wasn't, you know, it's more than 20 years because it's around the CRE and all of those types of organizations that I've really decided it's just about equality. You know, we're human. You know, we need to be seen. We need to be heard. We need the equity. We need equality. So for me, and as long as I have breath, that is something that I'm going to do, because, you know, I have a daughter. She's gone into probably the most difficult, or one of the most difficult countries you could decide to live in, and have mixed race children. She lives in Germany. When she moved there, I cried. I said, what are you doing? Why are you going there? But I've got to tell you, it's a changed, or certainly where she lives, it is an amazing place. So as long as I know I've got, you know, my grandchildren who will probably end up living in London or in the UK, I need to make sure that not only I do the best for them, but I do the best for any of all generations that are coming up hereafter. And I will keep doing that. And I think when I really felt my first real experience, I think, of prejudice would be when my first job, my only job actually, was when I was at CBS Records. I was there for 7.5 years, and I applied 3 times for a promotion for a job that I was already doing, and I never got it. And that was when I thought, you know, what is this? And I thought if I could do it for them, I could do it for myself. And the only way for me to move up was to move out. And that's what I did, and started the first Black-owned PR company. And then, you know, worked for the first Black newspaper. No. The first British Black newspaper, which was The Voice, because I think we had Caribbean Times and some of the other papers at that time. Worked with The Voice, worked with Root magazine. How many of you remember Root magazine? So, and it was at Root magazine that I met Neil and Patrick, who started Choice FM. And a little anecdote about that is that as we sit in the room that I'm in, I have got my background on, but in this very building that I'm sitting at is where Choice FM was born. So I now live where I worked, and we've got a blue plaque on the house to prove it, which is great.
That's amazing. And I think, I mean, a lot of people, there's a couple of comments in the chat about Choice FM, because of course it was so groundbreaking. And I think for a lot of people, life changing, just because of a celebration of Caribbean music.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody's here saying the Grant brothers, Eddie Ruby,
Oh,
and
gosh,
the
yeah.
you know. So yeah, and going from that, then I guess my question is, you know, of what are you most proud? I mean, in terms of all the many different things that you've done, what would you class as your
Wow.
greatest achievement?
Well, you know, I'm going to say my daughter and my grandchildren.
Of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I've got to say my daughter, because when I had my daughter, I was 19. And in those days, it wasn't the thing to be a young mother, and a young single Black mother. But she was my, you know, she was my fuel. She was the drive behind me. And I've got to say, I don't know another mother and daughter that, and I'm sure there are, but I just don't know them, that gets on so well as we do, to the point where she's kind of done this full circle. And now she actually works with me, and she helps me to run the Women in Business Network.
Oh, wow.
And it's almost now like she's the mum, because she's like, oh, you can't do it. She's very German now, by the way. After being there for about 20 years,
Yeah.
she's very German. But yeah, I mean, I've done some amazing things. You know, I've met Nelson Mandela. I think that was one of the most memorable things. And of course, apart from being invested with my commander of the British Empire, when I didn't even know what it meant, when the letter arrived that I was in the US with my sister, and people at the time, the people that worked for me at the time, called me and said, oh, you've got this envelope from the Cabinet Office. And I thought, oh my God, Cabinet Office, it's got to be tax or something governmental. I said, okay, go on, open it. And they read this very formal letter. The Queen is minded to, but this was from the Prime Minister, the Queen is minded to offer you this, and I'm minded to do that. And I thought, oh, CBE. Never heard of a CBE. I'd only heard of an OBE. And at that time, I thought, I don't want a CBE, I want an OBE. And I said, oh, don't worry, I'll answer it when I get back. And of course, this was what we call BG, right? Before Google.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was before Google. I can't even remember what was before Google, but I did search it, and I saw, you know, that was just one from the top, and I thought, okay, I'll take that. I'll take that. And I came back and I wrote to the Prime Minister, and I said, please let the Queen know that I am minded to accept the CBE.
Oh, gosh.
So yeah, so that was, those are just some of the, you know, there's so much, you know, in my 40 years. As I said, I've only ever had one job, and that was CBS. But in my 40 years of working for myself, yeah, no, I don't think I would change anything. It's been hard. You know, as you know, I've chaired many organizations. I've been on many committees. It's just been an amazing, and I think if I carried on, if I worked for somebody else, I probably would not have done as much. It's the freedom to do what you want to do that is exciting about being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, and I so before we sort of close to go to the Q&As, I just wanted to ask, you know, is there any advice, you know, in the same way that I was asking Adele, is there any advice that you'd like to share with us? Perhaps even something that your parents may have told you, but something that's essentially held you in good stead, that's kept you focused and motivated.
Okay, well, there's so many. There's so many.
Yeah.
And you've actually just mentioned one. One of the things that I always say, I mean, I do quite a few of these talks, usually to entrepreneurs or business people. And I always say, find your focus and focus on your focus, because energy flows where your focus, where your focus goes, energy flows. Let's get it round the right way. But it's always also about being passionate. And again, I say passion keeps me up late at night, and passion wakes me up early in the morning, and sleep gets in the way, because I would keep working if I could.
That's amazing.
But there's lots of sayings that,
Yeah, but I feel like, when I was saying earlier when I opened up today's event, that what I feel is common for all three of you is this idea that adversity is opportunity, that you just have a kind of mindset that doesn't see obstacles or refuses the obstacle, if you like. But yeah, I thank you so much for sharing a tiny bit of your story there. Obviously, we don't have much.
Tiny bit.
I know. I recognize it's really tiny, and it's so frustrating sometimes, because there's just so much to talk about. But yeah, what I'd like to do now. Well, first of all, thank you so much, and clapping on behalf of everyone.
Thank you.
What I'd like to do now is just kind of, if I can pin all of you to the screen and then open up for questions. And there were a lot of people who I saw earlier on had their hands up. Unfortunately, I couldn't go to them.
Yeah, I saw some hands.
But so let me just see if I can add a spotlight to all of you. And yeah, so I'm going to go through. Actually, Rod, if you're there. Rod?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here.
Can you go through and just see what questions are in the chat, so that we start by responding to the questions that are there first? And while you're doing that, I am just going to put one question to the panel before you, if I may. So something that struck me and was come to mind while all three of you were talking is that this Race Equality Week runs from, I think, the 6th of February for 5 days. And one of the things that I sort of get a sense of is that you've all sort of transcended issues of race in one way or another, or but yet still, we've had the Windrush scandal. There's still clearly a lot of race inequalities, although obviously people dispute to what degree. But I just wondered if you could all individually share what your view is on the present state in the UK on issues to do with race. If we maybe Yvonne, if we start with you and then go round Russell and then Adele.
I'm a bit skeptical about all these like race equality weeks and race equality this, because when you look at them, it's not us that's running it. It's not us. I mean, I know one of the biggest race equality week events is, well, it depends on whether you're talking about race as in African Caribbean, or if you're just talking about race. For me, I feel that, especially since the whole, Black Lives Matter, it's just been hijacked. I feel like we've been hijacked again in many ways. And I think a lot of people are making a lot of money from race or Black since Black Lives Matter. So I'm a little bit skeptical. I don't really join in any of those things anymore, because at the end of the day, it's not, I don't think we're getting the benefit, and certainly not the monetary benefit from it. Maybe I'm a bit skeptical about it all. Over to you guys.
Okay, yeah. Russell?
Well, I certainly think that, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, yep.
I certainly think we're not getting financial out of it, but I can see that it does act as a way of reinforcing to me what is important, which is that people should know their roots. If you know where you've come from, then I think that helps to ground you and gives you a way of trying to move forward. And the other thing that I think it does give you is a respect for those who have gone before you, who have tried to make this path a little bit easier. You know, I really, really do resent the fact that there are a number of, let's say, Black people now who seem more interested in pushing the ladder away than in letting young people get to that ladder so they can climb up. And it's happening a lot in politics. It's Black people who are some of these leaders in politics who are now being so negative about migrants and about immigrants and about coming to this country. And that is so wrong. They've completely lost sight of their roots. And to me, that's a disgraceful matter.
So you're referring there to the situation with immigration at the moment, but also, well, also with the Windrush scandal, because we've seen Suella Braverman's going back on some of the recommendations that came out of the Wendy Williams report.
Said in, you know, you said it in a nutshell. What on earth is she doing? Anyway.
But yeah, I really liked and agree with what you were saying, especially about the importance of knowing history. And I wonder, Adele, what do you think about the whole thing about knowing history? How important has it been to you? Like, because I know you're a real advocate and fan of the Caribbean as well. I mean, you were saying that you'd like to see a sort of, well, we already have CARICOM, but I mean, explain.
CARICOM really isn't enough.
Yeah.
When I enter Jamaica or Barbados or St. Lucia, where my mother was born, incidentally, with my Guyanese passport, I can stay there for 6 months. Whereas when when the UK was part of the EU, I could go with my British passport and I could go anywhere in Europe and stay as long as I like. So, you know, what I really want for the Caribbean is a real Caribbean community where we can just wander as somebody who was born in the Caribbean to anywhere in the Caribbean and set up business, et cetera, et cetera.
A union.
Sorry?
A union.
Yes, a real union. And then in terms of race, I like to think that my hair, I'm walking and proudly sharing my race every single day. As you commented on Facebook yesterday, Bonita.
Yes.
I think I'm probably the first lady in the house who has hints of Angela Davis.
You better be careful.
Power to the people, power to the people. When they asked me why I wasn't wearing my my badge, I've got a badge. I can enter the House of Lords anytime I want. When they asked me why I wasn't wearing it around my neck, I said, well, it's going to mess up my hair. So
very good.
I think there's ways of being Black in the UK where you're being, you know, proud of your race without necessarily shouting very loudly. I think I'm shouting very loudly with my hair every day without opening my mouth, without a voice, without saying anything.
It did feel like that to me, Adele. I was so proud of you. I just thought, this is wonderful. I've never seen an afro so big in the House of Lords. So I just thought it was brilliant. But yeah, you're right. It is about living in your skin and being comfortable with it and being proud of it, and just as it is. So yeah, I really like that. Rod, have you had a chance to look through the
Well,
questions?
just a couple of comments. Dr. Thompson, Ian G. Hall would like to know if you remember Tony Douglas of the West Indian World.
Of course. And Tony's, is it Tony Douglas? Who was Tony Douglas WNK as well?
Deputy editor. I don't know. It's what he says. He was the deputy editor of West Indian World. That's Arif Ali's old newspaper, isn't it?
Yeah.
No,
I remember the name, but there's also a Douglas who I think is Tony Douglas. Is it Tony Douglas?
You
That was-
want to chip in, Russell? You have something?
Yeah, just to go back, slight correction. Arif Ali started the Caribbean Times,
Mhm.
and his business led to a number of other publication and interests around communications. The West Indian World was separate, and in time it was edited by Mike Phillips,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and it moved on, and Root magazine and the rest came.
Mm.
But at that time, we were very, very, very grateful for the Voice coming along and also giving an extra platform for those of us who were trying to communicate with the community and to share an understanding and a meaning. So, yeah.
And Russell, you just mentioned Mike Phillips, his brother Trevor, whom we all know, Sir Trevor. He was also president of the NUS.
Yeah, Trevor came along later than I did. He was like 2 years younger than I did. And in fact, when I was running as a Lewisham councillor, raising issues to do with employment for Black people and also about equal rights in housing for Black people, Trevor did some programs because he was working then for London Weekend Television.
Oh yes, Black on Black.
On Black, he came and he did some interviews with me, and we profiled some of those issues as well. Yes, so Trevor's early days.
Wonderful. So that
Okay,
really...
apologies. I just remembered it was Joe Douglas that ran WNK Radio, which was a part-time. It was, I think it was only on at night, actually. It was Choice FM and WNK. Choice FM was 24 hours. WNK was only from 6 o'clock till 12 or something. But yes.
That plaque is on your house right now, isn't it? Yeah.
A Choice FM is, yes.
Yeah.
I
Just one other thing. There's a Jocelyn who's made a lot of comments, and she just says she feels like Christopher Columbus. What's happened this afternoon has been so edifying and invaluable. So there you go.
Wonderful.
I was going to say also at the time, just before Choice, there was some pioneering radio work being done by BBC Radio London by a gentleman, Alec Pascal.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
And he did quite a lot to, again, provide a voice for the community. And he must have taken some lashes over the time.
Of course he
Yes,
did.
he did.
He was a brave enough character to help get myself, Juliet Alexander, and other people where we could, I suppose, use the skills that we had to communicate and also to enthuse our people to become more active and involved in society. Because you've got to remember at that time, the stereotype was we were trouble.
Yeah.
We were out in the streets creating bother, and we should be locked down.
Yeah.
That was partly what had led to the fire in New Cross. Because of that stage in our presence in this country, the National Front was still prominent, and they were still stirring in the background. And that way of presenting Black people as huge problems to society meant that for a lot of our kids, they wouldn't speak, they wouldn't move, they wouldn't go out. So we were there to try and champion the cause that being Black was not necessarily in itself a negative fact.
Yeah.
And you can be Black and you can make a difference. And that's what we were doing at the time.
I also think that radio, when certainly from Choice FM's point of view, Alex and all those guys were great pioneers, and Dotton, I think, is still on, the slot where Alex and the others kind of kicked off. But, that's on the BBC and you're under control of the BBC. But for me, Choice FM broke the mold, broke it open, showed that we can do this too. We don't have to rely on government to make us, or to help us to get our voice heard. And even though, you know, I would have liked it to be a bit more political and, you know, more conversational, the only license we could get at that time was playing music. But I think the music did it for us, because before you wouldn't hear gospel music, you wouldn't hear reggae music, you wouldn't hear calypso, you know, and most of the music that we did play, you could only hear on mainstream radio sometimes. And God bless, oh my God, his name was, sorry, excuse me. Oh my gosh, his name was on my lips just now. Who's the guy that was at Capital Radio? And
Greg Edwards. Was it Greg Edwards?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he was one of the real big pioneers. So there's lots of us out there, and yeah, we opened it up for.
I think what stands out as well is this whole thing of taking the initiative to run things ourselves, to be, I mean, clearly that, you know, there's a difference between working for people where you can be, you know, you can't necessarily express yourself in the way you might want to, whereas when you run your own business, that's it. And that for me, that's the takeaway I'll take away from today is entrepreneurship is really key to this. You know, Adele, you set up, you co-founded Touch of Teal and took the initiative.
Can I say that what I found in life is that as soon as you find yourself saying, I wish they would X, Y, Z,
yeah,
you've actually identified something that's missing in your life. And if it's missing in your life, it's probably missing in other people's lives. You've identified a niche in the market, and that's actually an opportunity for you to start something new. You know, and that's, I think that's what I said earlier, that I actually created things that I found that I had needed. I needed a support group. I started that up. I needed a place to go and celebrate life as an ovarian cancer survivor. I set that up. And I think that, you know, even in Jamaica, we spend a lot of time there. I've set up something called the Ocharias Drinking Group, which is really a women's group. And I gave it a name which would flag people's attention, really. And, you know, we're fledgling, but we're going very well. And, you know, I needed to meet new people, basically, and that's what that was about. So I put it to anybody, if you find yourself saying, I wish that they would, they is actually you. And get started. You've got something that needs to happen.
That's the very same word Juanita and I heard. I wish they would form something like what we do now, Guyana Speaks. It didn't exist 7 years ago, but here it is today.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
So,
and that's what Yvonne and Neil and so on did with Choice FM. You know, we all wanted more than just 1 hour of Greg Edwards a week on.
We needed it. We needed it. But the funny story about that, when we started doing the research, because you had to do government research to show that you had an audience, and when we did the government research, and I guess you would expect that, the majority of what they called the diaries, the forms that people filled out and sent back to us, were young white people listening to the black music radio.
Yeah.
The majority of our audience were young white people.
Interesting.
But I mean, you know, you would expect that because obviously there are a lot more of them than there are of us. So yeah, it's been a great, interesting journey, and I've been glad to be part of it, really.
I've just spotted a question in the from Afia, and she's saying, wonderful presentations. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Thompson. Please, could we hear a bit more about your entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial journey? I mean, that would take forever, given how many years you've been involved in
what
that.
I can do, and I was just going to do that, was put my LinkedIn profile, my LinkedIn link in the box. So if anyone wants to contact me after, or an email, for those of you who aren't on LinkedIn. But yeah, it's been a great honor to share. And I've got to tell you, I've never been in the same room with so many Guyanese people at once. So thank
Okay.
you. It's been amazing. It really has.
Thank
That means you'll
you.
come back.
Absolutely. I'm
Yeah,
definitely
I
coming
mean,
back.
a part two would be great for something like this, because there's just so much to talk about. But Adele, I think I had a question for you, although I feel a little bit like you've answered it, but it was a question from Shamdil. She says, how do you overcome the emotional strain of such encounters if it repeatedly happens? Oh, okay, so this is in relation to work. So I mean, I guess you were probably still working for a lot of the time you were going through treatment, maybe, you know, when you had breast cancer, for example. How did you cope with that kind of going into work? Yeah.
The breast cancer wasn't so bad. It didn't really take a big toll on me because it was early stage breast cancer and the prognosis was not so poor. Ovarian cancer was a completely different deal. And I was, you know, in a very high pressure role at the time, huge accountability, huge budgets involved. And I think I went back to work after the first surgery. I went back after the second surgery. And at some point, I just thought I can't take this anymore because, you know, I thought my prognosis was about 1.5 years, and people were telling me about stuff which I just thought was trivial compared to what I was going through. So, you know, it's very, very, it can be very difficult. But I would say that largely, you know, as I said before, my approach to life now, if anything comes towards me, I pretty much just shrug it off because I know what my priorities are and I know what's important. So if somebody were to come and say something racist to me, or something about my hair, or something about being tall, or about being short, or about being fat, or about being slim, I think I'd have exactly the same approach and would largely be to ignore them. Or if I was, if I could come up with a witty quip quickly enough to respond that way, rather than to take it on personally, really.
Thanks, Adele. And just, I'm conscious of time, so I want to let you all go shortly. But I hadn't asked you actually, Russell, what advice you would share. I know I asked Yvonne and Adele, but I wondered what advice would you share for the younger generation about constructive ways to effect either social or political change?
Well, I think in a way, the other speakers have covered this point. It's about being strong-minded and being brave and having a great belief in yourself. You know, if you rely on others to do it, you might as well wait forever. You've got to go out there and believe that whatever it is you want to achieve can be done, and make sure you go out and believe in yourself when you're doing it. You know, if you're just weak-minded and hopeful, it's not going to. It's self-belief that makes the difference.
Right. So instead of, actually, I think that's really interesting, is instead of this kind of, sometimes you talk about victim mentality, it's about taking agency and understanding that you have agency and have control. But yeah, so I don't know if you all had a final word, and then we'll wrap up for today. So yeah, anybody want to put forward a final word?
Do you want to start, Adele? Or
Yeah.
Russell?
Well, we need to set agency. I think agency is a great word, and focus, I think Russell said as well. Great words.
I was going to stress, as I mentioned, about roots.
Roots, yes. Understanding your roots, where you come from. Absolutely. Understanding where you come from, agency, be focused. And Yvonne?
I think resilience for me. Resilience for sure. And I've got to apologize. I wrote this message and I was going to ask you before I posted it, and I pressed the wrong button. So I just wanted to let, if anybody wants to, is that okay? I mean, I can delete it. I'm so sorry.
No, absolutely.
Manners, bad manners.
I'm glad you put that in there, actually, because I was going to say, don't just share your LinkedIn, but also share your website, because there's a lot of information about you on your website. And I have to say, your career is to be marveled at. You know, you've achieved so much, and I think everybody, if you need a little bit of inspiration, these are the kind of people that I come to for my inspiration, and to know that, you know, there's a lot more to be done, that you can do. And as they've all exemplified, just have a bit of agency, focus, self-belief, resilience, don't forget your roots. And you know, just that self-belief is so important. So thank you for this is like the beginning of 2023. You've put us all in a great frame of mind for the rest of the year. So thank you very much.
And thank you. Thanks.
Thank
It's
you.
been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey,
Thank you.
and stop recording.
Thank you very much.